Throughout the entire history of humanity, perhaps the most challenging region to comprehend is the Russian geography. Delving into Russian history has become a complex and formidable task, even for intellectuals, thinkers, and historians born in Russia. Despite its difficulty and incomprehensibility, the importance of Russian history on a global scale, especially in the context of European history, is indisputable. The vast territories of Russia, with its immense forests, relentless rivers, and desolate steppes, have witnessed some of the most significant and sometimes tragic events in human history. Examining the development of states established in Russia as a single entity is not possible. These colossal lands have been under the control of vastly different administrations both culturally and socioeconomically over centuries. However, like any historical process, it is possible to explore the roots of this development. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of Russian history is its starting point. In the 9th century, the dynasty that gained power over the peoples in Russia and ruled them for approximately 800 years was not even a Slavic dynasty. For a full 800 years, Russia was governed by a family that came from other lands and was culturally and genealogically distinct from its own Slavic peoples. How did this exactly happen? To understand this, we need to grasp the situation in Russia in the early 9th century and the environment in which the Slavic peoples lived. The Slavs, called the Sviat, inhabited a vast area extending from the north of Russia, starting around Novgorod, to the southern shores of present-day Ukraine, divided into different tribes. These tribes engaged in trade with surrounding states and occasionally went to war with each other. No Slavic tribe could establish definite and long-term superiority over the others. A constant environment of struggle prevailed, constantly damaging trade rights. While the lands of the Sviat were suffering from constant uncertainty and war, the Vikings, who had sailed from the cold shores of Scandinavia, were experiencing their golden age. The situation had become unbearable for Europe. Vikings were coming, raiding, and leaving. They would return after a few years, and this process repeated itself at regular intervals. European kings could not find a short-term solution to deal with this. Vikings, enriched by these raids, were establishing new kingdoms, centers, and bases, continuing their raids more effectively from these centers. It was at this time that a Viking leader named Rurik arrived in the northern lands of the Slavs, what we now call Russia. The Sviat living in the north resisted Rurik's forces initially and tried to expel him. However, some among them saw the power of the Vikings as an opportunity to resolve their complex situations. They invited Rurik to lead them as their ruler and use his power to put an end to the endless conflicts. Rurik accepted the invitation of the tribal leaders, laying the foundations for the first Russian state. While there are different theories about the origin and usage of the term Rus that we use today, when we examine the situation from a broad perspective, we can say that the word Rus is a general name given to some Slavic groups that collaborated with the Rurik dynasty, which evolved over the years. So, how did Rurik establish order among the Slavic tribes? What did he do that the Sviat couldn't, leading to the establishment of the first organized state in these lands? First of all, it is important to understand that in that era, it was not possible to establish a state by developing only in civilian areas, at least in the geography where Rurik lived. Rurik, using the physical strength and combat skills of the Scandinavian warriors accompanying him, either annihilated or subjugated the tribes that did not obey his command through threats. However, their strength and proficiency in warfare demonstrated how they could act as a single entity. The Vikings' goal was to seize a vast territory from the north to the south of Slavic lands and control the new trade routes over these regions. Rurik knew that a hastily executed irregular raid would not work and would not be sustainable. Therefore, he began to move thoughtfully, step by step. Settlements needed to be taken one by one. A defensive line needed to be established for border regions, and thus the troops fighting on the borders should receive continuous support. For this to happen, the captured settlements needed to be strategically located, suitable for trade, and advanced. Rurik, through his warriors and tribes, took over some settlements and ordered their development. However, how would this be economically feasible? Because his treasury was not powerful enough to cover this, he needed to generate new income. Therefore, he imposed taxes on various tribes for the development of settlements and maintenance of surrounding buildings or walls. The main idea was that these payments would benefit everyone. In this way, the tribes understood that they needed to make payments to benefit from the resources and protection of the state they were part of. With the expansion of the state's borders, everyone would benefit from the spoils flowing into the region. Thus, the people realized that various gains achieved through Rurik could only be obtained through a sense of unity around long-term and common interests. In this way, Rurik laid the foundations for the great state that the Vikings dreamt of in Slavic lands. However, his life did not last long enough to witness the full maturity of this state. Instead, his successor Oleg successfully captured Kiev. Kiev was not only crucial for the region but also significant for the Vikings' goals in Slavic lands. When Vikings came to Slavic lands, they did not want to stay only in the north. They wanted to go south, be close to the trade routes in the Black Sea, and reach the major cities of the Byzantine Empire. For their expeditions to the south, they needed a base. By capturing Kiev, Oleg fulfilled the dream of those who came before him. The capture of the settlements was so important that some sources consider Oleg, instead of Rurik, as the founder of the Russian state. Kiev was regarded as a sort of capital for Oleg and his descendants. After capturing Kiev, Oleg first secured the superiority of a Slavic tribe called the Drevlians and imposed taxes on them. With the taxes collected from them and other tribes, he invested in the development of Kiev. For him, Kiev was not only a base for new expeditions but also a source of constant wealth through trade. Now it was time to seize the trade routes. However, there was a problem. The dominance of the Turkic Khazar Khanate in trade prevented them from obtaining the desired profit. The sovereignty of the Khazar Khanate in trade had to be eliminated. Therefore, Oleg convinced some Slavic tribes to take action against the Khanate and supported sporadic raids. However, these initial raid campaigns ended in failure. He could not defeat his enemy through direct attack. On the contrary, there were other methods that could be applied to break the power of the Khazars in the region. Therefore, he defeated one of the tribes paying tribute to the Khanate in the field of battle and forced them to pay him regularly instead. As a result, other tribes realized that the new power prevailing in the region was under Oleg's rule and began to pay him instead of the Khazar Khanate. Thus, although Oleg could not completely sideline the Khanate, he managed to weaken the power of the Khazar Turks in the region by cutting some of their income and influence sources. Now it was time to expand the scope of the state to the southwest because the roads and trade routes to the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, passed through this direction. At that time, the Hungarians lived in the southwest of Kiev. The Hungarians, to hinder Oleg, initially fought against him by pulling some Slavic tribes to their side. However, they later realized that it would be easier to defeat the kings in Bulgaria and redirected their attention to defeating the Bulgarians. Although the war initially went poorly for the Bulgarians, the situation turned in favor of the Hungarians when the Bulgarians called the Pecheneg for help. Realizing that survival in their lands would be increasingly difficult and they were surrounded by enemies, the Hungarians migrated westward. Some sources attribute the shift in the focus of the Hungarians from fighting the Russians to fighting in Bulgaria to the efforts of Byzantine diplomats. According to this theory, the Byzantine administration, tired of dealing with the Bulgarians, wanted to distract their enemies by convincing the Hungarians to fight against the Bulgarians. If this is true, there is quite an ironic situation, because the fact that the Hungarians stopped fighting the Russians to turn towards the Bulgarian kingdom would allow Oleg to realize his dreams about Byzantium. The migration of the Hungarians to the west was a turning point for Oleg. There was no longer any obstacle to him on the road to the Byzantine territories and the capital of Constantinople. He quickly placed his traders in these lands and took initiatives to take advantage of the weak situation of the Byzantine Empire. By land, he besieged the city with his horsemen, and by sea, he placed his warriors on many small boats, plundering the surrounding settlements and trapping the people and rulers inside the city. There was no other way for Byzantine rulers but to submit to Oleg's demands, and finally, a peace agreement was signed between the two states. The Byzantine side agreed to pay money and sign profitable trade agreements for the Russians. With this agreement, Oleg achieved what he wanted and became one of the leading leaders in his geography. Money was flowing into his cities from the surrounding trade routes, and his administration was continually gaining strength. With Oleg's victory, the foundation of the deep-rooted relations between the Byzantine and Russian administrations was laid. These relations played a decisive role for the administrations in Russian territories for many years and continued to influence the Belief Principality even after the physical collapse of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. During this period, the Russian state, centered in Kiev, could establish relations not only with local tribes but also with great empires and kingdoms. The state, dreamed of and laid the foundations by Rurik, had taken its place strongly among the European kingdoms with all its institutions. A new power had emerged, and the lands controlled by this power would witness some of the most important events, from Mongol invasions to the fragmentation of Napoleon's army, from the Hittite occupation to some key events in history.